For too long, women have been told to confine themselves physically, socially, and emotionally. I've been told that now is the time for women to stand tall, raise their voices, and claim their space. Let's have ourselves a pocket sized pep talk because to do this, women are going to need to rewrite the rules safely and without apology. And men, you can help by learning to become better allies, support women, and understand their point of view with the various issues they deal with at home and in the workplace. Am I an expert on this topic or the guy to deliver this message? No. But today's guest is. Stick around. You'll be glad you did.
A Pocket Sized Pep Talk, the podcast that can help energize your business and your life with a quick, inspiring message. Now, here's your host, Rob Jollis.
Today's guest, Eliza Vancourt, is a student of both the performing arts and political science, a Cornell University fellow, a best-selling author, a viral TED speaker, one of the top acting coaches in New York, and as a thought leader, has over 300,000 social media followers. If that's not enough for you, she's also the #1 best-selling author of A Woman's Guide to Claiming Space. Stand tall, raise your voice, be heard. And I've been looking forward to this conversation. So let's dive right in. And I want to start by reminding the men who are listening, don't touch that dial. All right, Eliza, with you, one of the things that really impressed me was jumping on your website, and I read that in terms of your backstory, and get ready, folks, because it's pretty amazing. What I read was that People magazine, when they interviewed you, your story was so jaw-dropping that the legal department asked for the documents to prove that it actually happened. That's a first for this show. Give us the backstory.
Yeah, I still remember that. My father and I crouched over boxes in my attic trying to find these old pieces of paper and taking pictures and sending it to people. Yeah, it was one of those moments where we looked at each other and we said, wow, we kind of forget how weird this was. And then, of course, we remember when we start talking about it. But I like to start the story by saying that my mother was a wonderful mother, Mary Louise Marini Vancourt. I dedicate my book to her. And she was really wonderful until I was about 4.5. And then she got late onset paranoid schizophrenia. And she ended up completely losing custody of me. And she just couldn't deal with not having me. So she kidnapped me, not one, not two, but 3 times. There was a national APB out on me. And one of the times I went across the country by truck, hitchhiking from truck stop to truck stop to truck stop, all the way from New York to California. And what happened on that trip made me start to conflate invisibility with safety. I started to think, if I can be invisible, I'll be safe. But of course, it took me a long time to realize that being invisible isn't safe. It's really dangerous. But that was kind of my rocky beginning.
Oh, I'd say that's Rocky, all right. How old were you?
Well, it was 3 times. So
Oh,
by the time I was done, I was in kindergarten.
oh.
And I actually have this vivid memory of this kid opening his lunchbox and crying. And I thought someone had died because to me, like, that's why you cry. Because I was pretty traumatized and, bad things had happened. And then he said, I don't remember, something like his mother hadn't given him a cookie or something. And that was this moment where I realized my life is different than everybody else's. The stuff that bothers other kids doesn't seem like a problem to me. It was when I started to kind of think, wow, everybody has different experiences. And boy, do they set you apart in some ways and not always in a good way.
Yeah. But as a credit to you, you find that very positive thinking people will have not necessarily that thrown at them at that age, but have life's curveballs, life turns on a dime. And yet they tend to bounce to, well, my health is good. They'll immediately find something. And there you were as a kindergarten, as a very young child, already almost rationalizing and learning what real stress was about in a sense. And
Yeah.
I guess appreciating your position. Correct?
I definitely think it made my sense of humor get pretty sharp because one way I deal with life is I just realize that it's beautiful and it's hard and it's funny. And my mother I don't usually tell this story, but my mother, when she had me the last time, had only fed me ice cream and marshmallows for 9 months. And when the police stopped us, the police officer took me so they wouldn't hear what was happening with my mother. It pulled me into an ice cream shop and was like, "Would you like some ice cream?" And I remember even at that little age thinking, he doesn't realize just how not comforting this ice cream is to me.
Wow.
This is funny. Like my little 6-year-old self was like, I'm sure there's part of this that's funny. So, of course I had to go through a lot of therapy though. And that's the flip side of all this is I had a father and a stepmother who were incredibly proactive getting me therapy. And I'm pretty sure and I had a community of women who sort of scooped me up and said, like, we're not going to let this girl fall. And I think that's why I am where I am. So I don't really believe anyone does it alone.
Beautiful. Uh, do you eat ice cream to this day?
Actually, I freaking love ice cream. So
You
yeah,
forgave
no,
ice cream, okay?
it
Yeah.
took a while though. Marshmallows and ice cream. There was a while it was on my no fly list, but no, I love ice cream. Who doesn't?
Well, I told you it was an incredible backstory, and really, it's one of the many reasons why I wanted to meet you because I love talking to people that have had life happen to them, and have the kind of smile that you have on your face, and are reaching people and telling your story. And it's hard to find that gear as a speaker, as a communicator, if you haven't been there. So, in a sense, I'm not going to use the word blessing, but I will say that it's part of your path, part of your journey, and it's helped you become the incredible person that you are. So um, that's amazing, really. Thank you for sharing that with me. I had read about it, but I wanted to hear it firsthand.
Yeah. Well,
Incredible.
I mean, the one thing I will say, this is something I tell people all the time, which is that bad things are going to happen to you. And the question really for me is, will those bad things go to waste? Or will you use those bad things to get up, brush yourself off, learn and grow, and maybe even help other people because of it? So if it's only a bad thing, then it's just a bad thing. But if you turned it into something else, then it was not really a waste or a tragedy, it was an opportunity.
Well said. And and I hate to kind of crowbar a Jala story in, but I guess it was about 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, we had a fire in our house. No one was hurt, no one was harmed. Okay. But it was significant enough. We were out for a year. So you do the math. That house was gone, gone. And I had 3 children living in that house with my wife and I at the time. Now that, yeah, like I said, everyone was out, even the animals. But I say this to you, it became one of the greatest things in a sense that ever happened because life happens. I refer to it as a punch in the nose. It's scary getting a punch in the nose. It's probably the scariest not ever being punched. Once
Yeah.
you've taken a punch to the nose, it's not like you invite another one, but that level of fear comes down and you realize, no, I know what that feels like, and I know that I can put one foot in front of the other and keep moving forward. And so it was an opportunity to mentor, it was an opportunity to get them through that. And all 3 college essays were about that fire and so they do not look at it as a terrifying experience. Me, I was chewing my nails, when no one was looking, but it really helped define the family. I don't look at it as a bad thing that happened to us.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, first of all, it's a testament to your parenting, but secondly, I think it is what you do with it. I mean, I also, at the time, they did not have milk carton kids. Milk carton kids happened. They weren't actually using them for parents who kidnap their child. Now they do. Well, back when they were still doing the milk carton. I don't know if anyone knows about the milk carton kids, but when a kid was missing, they'd have a missing kid and put it on the back of a milk carton. So I used to joke that I was mad I didn't have the milk carton because if I did, and if I was on it, I could frame it, put it on my wall, and whenever anything bad happened, I could look at it and go, it's going to be fine. Things are
Yeah.
going to be fine. Look at that. I'm going to be okay.
Maybe you could just tack
So,
a marshmallow to the wall and we get that.
mark a little rusty marshmallow. Yeah.
All right, let's go to the book, A Woman's Guide to Claiming Space. Let's start with the term claiming space. I think I know what it means, but something tells me you as the author got a better definition of that. So you tell me.
Well, for me, claiming space is living the life of your choosing unapologetically and bravely. And bravery isn't the absence of fear, bravery is fear meeting action for me.
Okay. All right. And you know, for me, and maybe we got part of the story already, but I'm floating this idea with one of a big writer center here in Maryland of creating a podcast called A Book Finds You, because nobody finds a book. It's rare that I woke up and I just no, something happens, etc. So we've got your backstory as a child. Okay. Was there something that kind of, how did the book find you is where I'm going with this question.
It was definitely a process.
Mhm.
I had a head injury, so I'd been teaching acting for 20 years. So it was in the acting technique that I teach, which I developed my own spin on it, is all about observing the micro behaviors in other people, the minutia of human behavior, and being aware of your own emotional life. So it gives you some real acuity when you're trying to communicate well that other people may not have. So I was already good at it, but then I had an accident. I was hit in the head with a car by when somebody was texting and driving. Don't do that. And I got a bilateral brain injury and a subdural hematoma. This was in my early 40s. And I lost my ability to remember very well. So I'd go to bed and all my memories would be there. I'd wake up and they'd be gone. And my communication was seriously compromised. And so I had to rebuild my communication. So I had to go from an intuitive communicator to a mindful communicator. And once I kind of cracked the code of communication and broke it down, I realized that while I had been an excellent acting teacher before, and I'd already been doing a lot of coaching on communication and job interviews and talks and whatever, I was so much better after my accident. And I started giving talks and I started going around and doing all of these wonderful things throughout the world. And what happened was women would follow me into the bathroom. Weird turn, but not real weird. And they would say, I got to ask you a question I didn't want to ask in Q&A. And it was all the same questions, no matter where I was in the country or the world. And I thought, we got to take these conversations out of the bathroom and into the sunlight. And that was the beginning of the book.
Outstanding. Perfect. Perfect. And oh, by the way, just a little trick of the trade from we professional speakers. You know, a lot of times the audience, somebody wants to set up a Q&A, which actually brings the energy down a little bit. But I can't tell you how many times, particularly when I'm almost looking forward to that little pause when no one has a question. And I always would say, well, you know what, wait a minute, I've got a question for me. And I'll turn my shoulders, but I'll fire those kinds of questions at me as if it's coming from the audience, because same thing is it's sort of that 80-20 rule. I know where some of those questions are coming from, but sometimes that audience is intimidated. They don't want to ask it in front of that whole group, and maybe coming up to the side of the stage. Well, there's 3 or 4 other people there. So that might be one or two you want to ask yourself right before we finish. I've got a Q&A, but I ask all the questions of me. Now, Eliza, you know so much. Do you know this one? But anyway, it's the way I'll get at some of those big ones, because people don't realize that I didn't even. It's difficult for people to come out of an audience and approach a speaker. Our knees are knocking. We're battling imposter syndrome. I've been doing it over 40 years. I still think, whoa, what am I doing up there? But it's easier for us. We want to make it easy. So we don't have to follow us into the restrooms. We're good right on the stage. But anyway, think about sliding that into your next presentation. See what happens.
Well, the funny thing about my Q&As is I always tell people, you're gonna have to schedule for an extra hour. I'm happy to stay. And the only, nowadays, the times that they follow me to the bathroom is when they cut it off at an hour. I actually had a conference I was at recently where somebody didn't show up and they pulled me up just for Q&A and they had to cut it off. So Q&A is my lifeblood.
Wow.
I love Q&A. The talks I love giving, but I love the interaction with people so much. It's so rewarding. It's probably because I was a teacher for so long.
Isn't that interesting? We're going to lose half my audience right now when I tell you I'm the complete opposite. I actually, I'll never tell my client, oh, darn, you want a Q&A? How dare you? No, it's expected, but it brings the rhythm of the presentation down. It typically fits at the end where we've stuck our landing like a gymnast coming off a balance beam. It can get a little bit slow and we're often sort of pushed off at the end. There's no real close. There are ways around it, but I can never tell my client, I don't want a Q&A. Why would I want to hear from your audience? but it's a little clunky. There's ways around it. I'll share that one with you offline. But let's keep rolling. You broke. I'll test you out as a speaker now. Okay, you've broken what you've written down into key behaviors. I want to see how nimble you are because I know that there are 5 key behaviors to get what as you call them space claiming queens. All right, tell me about the 5 behaviors. But the quiz is, can you do it briskly? Can you kind of nip them?
I definitely can. Usually my talks focus on part 1 and part 2, but here are my 5 aspects of claiming space. So the first one is claim space with your physicality and your voice. So make sure that you're moving your body in space as you want to. The second one is claim space by building community, which includes getting anti-mentors out of your life who could poison your community. The third one is make sure that those big boulders that life will accidentally and sometimes on purpose throw upon us are not smushing us, that we actually take those big, terrible things that happen, we whittle them down into the size of a pebble, and we put them in our pocket, and we go, oh, okay, I can learn from this, rather than letting it weigh you down. The fourth is making sure you learn to shut down aggressors, and the fifth is making sure that you're uplifting all people, not just yourself. I found that people who are able to reach their hand out and pull other people with them tend to do better, not just for others, but for themselves as well.
And that's what makes a pro. Well done. You're past you got an A+, actually. You know, really the difference between authors often and communicators and the rest of the world is we will say things, but we've learned to say it succinctly. We've learned to say it so you can actually remember it, so you can implement it. And that takes a little bit of living and it takes a little bit of practice. You're so good, you almost went too fast for me. So I want to just double back on 1 or 2. They're very well done. One is the learn from it. I'm taking my hat off to you on that one. I think one of the biggest struggles that people have is sort of falling into a victim mode of wasn't my fault. I didn't do anything wrong. And frequently it was barely your fault. You did very little wrong. But there's always something to look in the mirror and go, but I could have done that better. And if we don't do that, then what happens? We repeat it in a sense. So so the book goes into that, does it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have the belief
Yeah.
that there are no mistakes. So one of my favorite people who I talk about in the book all the time, Kim Munson Burke. Here, it's a funny story. I was dating a much younger man, and I said, I'm worried I'm wasting my time because I'm not going to end up with this guy probably. He's a lot younger, and I don't think that's what this is about. But I really like him. And she said, well, that's if you believe in the concept of time. And I said, Kim, even for you, that's a lot. And she said, no. Either you stay with him and then it's not a waste of your time, or you don't stay with him and you learn what you need to learn to go on to the next thing. So either way, it's not a waste of your time. And so I think those things that fall on us, those big boulders, we can ruminate on them and we can let them define us, or they can be this little pile of pebbles we carry in our pocket for the rest of our lives, and that we can touch them and say, oh, I've been through this. I can do this. Or, oh, I miss that person, and that's okay. How lucky I was to know them, And so it's really about how we decide to take those things that will fall on you and move forward.
Right. Well said. And P.S., you can probably do it now. I got a couple of years on you. I could write down the 4 or 5 most useless times in my life. In other words, where I just was actually consciously thinking, what are you doing? How can this possibly contribute to where you're going? And I'm telling you, those are the ones that were most pivotal on
Yes,
actually taking me where I was trying to go. Just not at the time. I couldn't see it.
totally. Absolutely. I mean, I don't know. I'm a big lover of mistakes. I just think if you don't make mistakes, it means you're not trying hard enough. It's like a skier. Skiers are just never the ones that get really good, are the ones that haven't fallen a million times. They
Right.
figure out just how far they can go so they don't fall and they can go faster.
Yeah, absolutely. Something about, did you ever see a movie called Defending Your Life?
I can't believe you said that. I just watched that the other day. It's one of my favorite movies of
Such
all
a good
time.
movie. Right. Well, we click on that one. And what's the message? The message is you can't let fear hold you back. Uh,
No.
folks, you're
That's
going
a
to have to, we're
finding.
not going into this movie too deeply. You're going to have to go watch it. Trust me, Meryl Streep, Albert Brooks, you're going to like it. And there's a tremendous message, but it centers around why we're here in a sense, one author's version. And the fact that he pulled fear out of it and say, think of when you go get past your fear or when it holds you back as a criteria. Just astonishing.
It's one of my favorite. It actually did kind of define a lot of my outlook on a lot of things because I thought that makes a lot of sense to me. Just so much sense. It's a great movie. Great
Me
movie.
too. Good. Well, we're a small but mighty cult crowd that really loves that film from the 90s, but it still holds up. All right.
It
One other
does.
point I just wanted to poke real fast that you mentioned, and I want to hear you tell me how you do this. The aggressors, shut down aggressors.
Mhm.
Okay. We all want to do it. Is there a technique you follow? I mean, do you have a game plan on that?
Yeah, I mean, the book is 5 sections. The intro is the concept. I usually tell a personal story, but then it's just how to. Because
Right.
I was so tired of books for women that were like, you should journal. It'll feel good. I'm like, what the heck? Like, that's not enough. You would never, if a man was struggling, be like, you know what, Chad, go home and journal. All your problems will be solved. And yet somehow I had a reporter say to me, if one more so-called expert for women tells me to tell women to beeping journal, I'm going to beeping kill myself. So anyway, that's my little rant about journaling. But I think that with the group that I talk about a lot are first of all, emotional snipers. Those are people who you're talking to them and then you walk away and you're like, why am I bleeding? What just happened? But also anti-mentors who can be in the workplace, and they can be somebody who is really close to you from your family or boss that has mentored you a long time, but it's somebody who should be one of your greatest supporters, but instead they leave you feeling small and vulnerable and insecure. And so I have steps on how to deal with anti-mentors. I would say with people in general, if you're dealing with microaggressions, those little tiny pokes where you don't quite know, is it real, is it not? The best thing to do is to ask a question. So my favorite example in the world is I had a client who was a woman in a firm, only woman in her department. She was just rising so quickly, and she just closed this huge deal. And her boss went up in front of everyone and said, oh, I'm going to change her name. We're so happy for Jane. She'd done so well, blah, blah, blah. And then he said, she did close this great deal. And then he said, hey, Jane, I hope you didn't go out and spend all that money on a new purse.
Ooh.
And, he had been constantly doing things like this. This was not atypical. And so this time Jane was ready and she just said, what do you mean? And then didn't say anything. She just let it drop. And he's like, like it'd be funny, like, spend money on a new purse. Like, and she was like, you think I'd spend the company's money on a new purse? Smiley face. And then what happens is when you do that, a lot of the men around you, or just anyone with more power, will step in, and which is what happened. This very broy dude stepped in and went, yeah, dude, like, that's not cool. And kind of shut down the dynamic. And the boss ended up, later going up to her and saying, I'm very old fashioned and I'm older and I forget these things and I apologize. And she was like, no harm, no foul. But
Yeah.
I think sometimes if you can basically take what somebody says and flip it on them, so they have to, because they don't always understand why they did it. And it allows them to have to self-reflect and realize, well, why did I do this? What was my intention? And often the person alone will kind of backtrack if their intentions weren't kind.
Right. Particularly if you take it offline. It's tough when you're in front of the team or whatever to really get that. But it's amazing how we go to another room and have that conversation. I was curious because, when people give presentations, when we're as speakers, we get, I've always called it just snipers, but basically people that sort of hide behind the audience and say things that are aggressive. And one technique similar to your question, but it's a little more aggressive, is we always say the first one's free. I mean, I really don't want a confrontation. We're
Mhm.
both going to lose. But to bring in that audience, as your example did, my question was always, that came out just a little bit aggressively. Did you intend it that way? And of course, people, now this is when we're in front of a crowd and we're just trying to get out of the room. They're not thrilled with the question, but they'll immediately go, well, no, I just wanted to know if the company was going to go, oh, well, the company's doing such and such. But we've actually, sometimes we have to do something where it just won't stop. And we lose the respect of the audience if we don't. So anyway, it's just throwing a technique back at you. We call it flushing them out a little bit. I wouldn't do it in a team meeting. I like your approach much better, which is a question. Hopefully, would only take one, and then we can allow that the rest of the conversation take place in another location.
And sometimes just saying, "What do you mean?" is
I
enough.
love that.
And you just, the temptation, however, is to fill the silence and to start talking because you're nervous. And the most important thing is just mic drop, boom, smile. I always say smiley face, just look right at them and smile and just wait for them to have to explain why they said it.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting talking to you, and I've got to get on board here. I'm asking you questions about people and conversations. And frequently, because been on stage so much in my life, I channel it as in front of an audience when I'm getting somebody saying something that's inappropriate. And that's a very awkward moment it's probably the most terrifying moment for anybody who gives a presentation. I don't have to be a professional. Before you went in, I said, oh, I just saw the future. I was there. I'm back now. And guess what? The audience loves you. Who would be nervous? Who would be anxious about speaking to an audience? We're anxious that somebody's going to be aggressive. And but I'm gonna settle back and keep reminding myself, we're not necessarily talking about presentations. We're talking about communicating with people one-on-one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot, the skills, like when I do my workshops, I do public speaking workshops, but I see it as a continuum. So I see like the macro behaviors of public speaking, and then all the way down to like what we're doing here, which is more the micro of one-on-one, but we're still public speaking. I mean, if I were drinking a glass of wine with my girlfriends, I would be speaking very differently. I'm Italian, I like to swear, like I would be different than I am here. I'm still myself, but I'm my professional self. You have to have a certain level of decorum. And so I think for me, that sort of spectrum applies. You just basically can scale it. You can make it bigger or smaller, depending on the circumstance that you're in. I mean, often when I get asked, I don't usually actually get asked a lot of hostile questions. I've only had one where someone actually interrupted me in the middle of a talk. But and in that case, I just said, I'm sorry, you're going to need to wait till the end for Q&A. And then they left in the middle. That was the only time that it ever happened.
That was a blessing. Congratulations. That really worked out well.
But yeah, I mean, for me, I find that people are, I don't know if it's because of the content that I'm talking about. I talk about something that I think really does benefit all people, which is, how do you persuasively communicate in an authentic way, which, regardless of what the genre is. And I think it really makes a difference for people, in every aspect of their lives. So a lot of people who do my business workshops later contact me and say it helped their relationship and such things.
Makes sense. A Woman's Guide to Claiming Space. Stand tall, raise your voice, be heard. I'm on Amazon. My audience likes to buy books. I demand it of them. And they also like to write reviews because I demand that of them. So go get this book. Go take a look at it. It's a number one best-selling book. You got to grab this book. And I'm assuming how many reviews you have on this book?
I don't even know.
Tell me.
I haven't checked.
You haven't checked? Oh my.
I do read them all though. I read every one of them. I just can't remember how many I have, but I have a few.
I'm predicting you have quite a few. And the only speaking from the man camp, the only snipers I'd be concerned about would be potentially, I don't want to diss all men. I'm a card carrying, man myself. But I would, in a workshop, I could see the potential. I don't hear any of it in this conversation, but let's face it, men can get aggressive. Do you have a lot of men that come into your workshops?
Yeah, for sure. I actually don't find, I don't know. I think it's just the teaching for so long. I don't get people being aggressive. They're usually really excited. I think I usually start out because, they see the title of my book and then they have assumptions on who I may be. And I usually just start out by saying, look, I'm a radical feminist. And what that means in my mind is that I believe very strongly that women should have equal rights and opportunities. So congratulations, everyone in this room is also a feminist. And now we can all get past that and do our workshop because the reality is there's nothing, it is radical. Change is radical. And right now, if you just look at the stats, women are not achieving what men are because we just started behind in the race. And I think that for me, the men that I interact with are just so excited to learn about the communication stuff and to learn, oh, wow, I never realized that that's why I do that, because men face their own can of worms as communicators that I find in many cases to be really hard for them. And so everybody's sort of learning together about each other. I think that, I don't know, I think humanity is like a bird. If one wing is too strong, it doesn't fly right. So everybody benefits when both wings are strong.
Give me an example of from a man's, what you were just saying, men, sometimes we have our own struggle. Give me an example of one of those.
Well, if you think about how men are allowed to feel in our society, really men are not allowed to feel much but like enthusiasm and anger. So, and if you don't believe me, think about that joke of a man being really drunk and being like, I love you, man, I love you, and how it's funny that a man would like express that he loves his best friend, right? That's
Right.
hilarious. Like somehow he's weak. So men don't have, I mean, they're not allowed to be vulnerable, right? They have to, traditionally, men were supposed to be in charge. They're supposed to take care of everybody. All of these things, there's historical memory for all of these feelings that men are not allowed to have. And so then you ask them to go up in front of a group of people, and at a certain section of their talk, they need to show vulnerability, which is shamed. Many men feel shame when they are vulnerable and they struggle. And then, they come up to me at the break and they say, every time my dad, I would fall over and I would cry when I was little, my dad would tell me to stop crying.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, no wonder it's hard for you. You were trained to shove that feeling down deep. So I think that there are things that every gender struggles with. And that's why I'm not a big fan of the victim mentality. I think we're all, the goal, right, is for all of us to see what everybody struggle with and try to raise each other up and give each other space to step out of those norms. So a man can look at his best friend and say, hey, you've been there for everything. I really love you. And it's not a joke.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was raised by a Marine, and my phrase was very precise. Men don't cry.
Right.
That was and while I was sniffling, I mean, I did a lot of, but that was taught at a young age, and to this day, I'm disclosing to you right now, I do, but I don't like anybody to see me. And so I find I'll typically, even if it's a movie, there's certain movies that are very touching to me, and I'll get busy. I'm like, anybody need lemonade? I'll find a reason to get out of the room, even though my wife and my daughters, could care less.
Right.
Matter of fact, they compliment me every day, like, Dad, is your now I was, there's a bug in my eye, whatever. But Dad, it's okay. I kind of know it is, but boy, that was bred into me at a very young age.
Right. And how hard is that? Because
Yeah.
life is full of sadness sometimes, and I believe emotions like a balloon, like you squeeze it one way, you try to control it, boom, it comes out another way. So, I was talking to a therapist who says she deals with a lot of men with anger issues. And she says, but how can I blame them? If anger is one of the few feelings you're allowed to have, then everything comes out through anger.
Yeah.
So, it's a lot of it is teaching men to be able to feel the other things. And women too. I had a friend, a boss did something really jerky to her and she was crying. And she said, and I said, wow, you must be angry. And she's like, I'm not angry. And I'm like, that's because you're not allowed to be. You're allowed to be sad, but that would make me angry.
Yeah.
So, just kind of, I think human beings, we're all living this human experience. And if we can kind of let go of some of those rigid, gender expectations that are damaging. I don't think all gender expectations are damaging, but the damaging ones, I think we'll all actually live more happily. I see that in communication constantly, that a couple is like, my friends are, the man, the woman are mad at each other. And it's so clear to me, it's because like the woman can't get mad, the man can't get sad. She's being passive aggressive. She feels like he's yelling at her. And it just, they can't really find that deeper level underneath all that stuff.
Yeah. What was it? Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. That was the first book I read. But my wife encouraged me to read. Not that I had to say that, by the way, but where I really was the first time, and it was like the 80s, I think, but where I went, well, this is kind of making sense. And when I come back to an audience that's listening right now, uh, it helps to understand how people are wired, how people are thinking. Even to this day, sometimes when my wife says, you always, and you never did, I always go, always, never, always, never. No, I don't always. And I see it so literally, and it's just not meant that way. Of course, not always, never. Just communicate, but it's two different brains in a sense, looking at the same thing. Just
Yeah,
fascinating.
it's so interesting. And like I work with so many clients who feel like they have a superpower now because once you start to understand human behavior and you're walking in a room full of people who are focusing on words and not realizing that most of their behaviors are not coming from the words, it's just unbelievable. It's really exciting and fun. I find the human psyche so amazing because if you communicate better, you will do better in your career, period, on that.
I'm with you on that one. As a matter of fact, I rail on about every fourth podcast about my disdain for the word soft skills. I can't stand those words. I actually refer to them as performance skills. And I wish I actually worked 14 years now with people in career transition. They're struggling. They're hurt. They're losing their confidence. And if there's 200 of them in a room, and frequently I'm working with groups of 200 and 300, if there's 200 of them, 198 of them are there because their performance skills have failed them. Nobody really taught them how to fit in with a team or communicate with the boss or communicate with female teammates, or female teammates communicate with male. It's not taught, and it's life-changing for many people.
Totally. Here's my favorite. Can I give you an example? This is like my favorite example. Can I show you?
Yeah.
So, I had a client who is relatively soft-spoken. She kept going to somebody who kept telling her to get louder for authority, get louder, get louder. And she just felt so uncomfortable getting as loud as they wanted her to be. And so I said, instead of getting louder, just get a tiny bit louder as your baseline, not a lot, not just a teeny smidgen. And then when you want somebody to pay attention to you, drop your volume. So for example, because as human beings, we build intimacy by telling secrets. So for example, I could say, yesterday I went to the store and I got milk and I got eggs. Or I can say, yesterday I went to the store and I got milk and I got eggs. And suddenly the milk and eggs are really important. And that is because as human beings, we would never say, I have a secret. Even in a room with one person, we'd say, I have a secret. So it makes people feel like you're connecting with them, and teaching people these tiny things, like I'm doing it now, that pull people into the conversation it's just not that hard to do. And it's so transformative.
Absolutely. I actually, I'm working with people because I did so much radio before there was a podcast, and I couldn't see the people I was talking to. I learned just naturally a technique. I call it the stop and drop. I would slow my voice down at the end of the point I was making and drop it. And no one ever stepped on my voice because they knew unconsciously, oh, he's done. You do that too, by the way. You don't drop it, but it's very easy to communicate with you because I always know when you're done talking. You slow down, and you basically sort of stick the landing. Where some people, you never know. Is that it? Are you done? You got more? Where are we going?
Where's the mic drop?
Yeah. You do that naturally. All right, I could talk to you all day. We'll come down the home stretch. I want to ask you one more question, then I want to make a point with you. I want to change one of your a point of view you might have. I'm going to try. Lifting other women, supporting other women. I would think that this would be natural. I know you think it's important. Talk to me about that.
Well, think about it historically, if you think of power as a triangle, and the tip of the triangle is where all the power is, and the bottom is where the least power is. Traditionally, white men have been at the top. Traditionally, you look at like what was that, any kind of movie from the 50s, it's all white dudes and they're pretty little secretary. Now that's changing. But for a while, there was one woman or one Black person, right? You had that tokenized one person. And there was a real feeling back then that there was only room for one. So if somebody came up, you would have to leave. Or if you wanted to get in there, you had to push somebody out. There was really room for one. And so I think a lot of times people in targeted groups come about things from a place of scarcity. So I will often have clients who say, oh, this person's going after me. Turns out they're younger and from the exact same demographic. And so I think we need to move. So now, even if you are in a place where it's not like that demographically, there's a historic memory that is really passed on of we need to compete against each other. And men don't have that because historically they'd be like, Bob, let's go golfing. I have a card, you have a card, let's help each other. Women, it was, I got to be the one. And so I think it's really easy for us to get in a place of competition. And it's really important for us to make sure instead that we're going at things from a place of abundance, that I really believe this, when we rise together, we rise so much higher. And so in my book, I outline distinct ways to do that. Also, historically, white women have had a couple more spots at the top than women of color. And that has made women of color not really want to join us in trying to, go through all of these glass ceiling breakage and all that stuff, because they don't feel like we're on their team. And I feel like it's really important for white women to self-examine when we're lifting people up. Are we just lifting up people who look like us, or are we lifting up all people? And I think that's the other real key, is unity is strength. And so we want to make sure that we're equitably lifting all women up when we lift people up.
See, I knew you were done with that statement too. Just slow down. Well said. I want to make sure I understand this correctly, because I have an opinion here on what you're saying. Is you didn't lose me on 98% of your response there, but a woman or a minority, let's say, who's reached a position of of authority, is there a temptation for them not to lift up another minority, to hold their space?
Well, we used to be rewarded, for kind of keeping other people down. We're the one person, we are their one Black,
Okay.
And they actually still talk about that. I mean, I work with a lot of Black women as clients, and they say, I sometimes feel like they are trotting out my Black face to show that they have diversity.
Yeah.
And so what happens is it can make you really feel like, yeah, you are the only one who's allowed to be in that spot, and therefore you really can't let others in. I think we're moving away from that, but I think it's just important to note that it's not just that oppression is coming from men toward women or unkindness. Sometimes women can participate in that with each other. And so we have to clean up our own house as well and look inward, not just look outward and work on just those other forces. And those other forces are there, but it's not that simple.
Got it. Good. And actually, I'm glad you made that point. My father-in-law, who's no longer with us, was an ambassador, and he would tell me about that, about some of the minorities. He was always surprised they weren't actively working to bring in other minorities to strengthen that position. And it surprised me. So hearing it from you kind of validates that in a sense. It's just, maybe it's just it's an unconscious behavior, but I'm glad you're putting it out there, and I'm glad you're writing about it and speaking about it, because I think when we really examine it, that's not a hard decision to make. I think it just fools us a little bit, maybe, and we got to keep an eye on it. Okay. All right.
Yeah, I think always look inward first, I mean, you can't change your other people as easily as you can change yourself.
Right.
So anytime you can look inward and try to clean up your own house first of all, you'll be stronger to go out and clean up everything else. But second of all, you'll make sure that the fundamentals are taken care of.
Outstanding. Okay. The book is called A Woman's Guide to Claiming Space. Stand tall, raise your voice, be heard. And here's the one I wanted to double back on. Last, I promise I'll let you go.
No, I'm
I
loving
just
it.
want to get, oh, good. I don't, uh, the journal piece, I'm going to throw a curveball at you. I'm a guy who journals, but I want to
Hmm.
tell you what I missed and what I learned. I journaled for decades, just because I travel so much, got 3 million miles in the air. I just, I fell into a routine of always journaling on the way out and journaling on the way back. And when you travel around this world and speaking, there's a lot of stories to tell. But I was methodical about getting it wrong. In other words, I would journal for the sake of journaling, and then I would intentionally never look at it because I don't want to change history. What a mistake! When I realized that, well, wait a second here, uh, you don't have to change your story, but if you're not looking at what you're writing, and not necessarily that day, but if you're not looking at it and trying to figure out, was there a message there? I mean, what did you learn from that story? You don't have an opportunity to really gain any wisdom. If you do, and I believe that wise people are people that, have good things happen to them, have bad things happen to them, but have a conscious knowledge of the lessons that they learned from each. That's how we become wiser. And so, not that everybody has to journal, but finding a time to be methodically observant, as I call it, and then revisiting it at a later time to figure out, was there a message? Not always message, really makes that a valuable tool. I think people journal for the sake of just writing things, and that's was me, and it was a mistake. So that's my journal pitch to you.
I think journaling is awesome, but what I find annoying is when it is the tool.
Yeah,
And it's a arsenal, it's part of our arsenal. It is not the arsenal. And often you will have whole articles for women about like the importance of journaling, but they never, you're having trouble with your boss, journal. It's like, okay, journal
right.
and
Right. And then you're taking a snapshot to learn from this.
I,
Because if we really start having a conversation, we start with that rotten boss, and we can oftentimes end with, you know what I need to do is, and maybe I can bring in, and we begin to problem solve. So it slows us down, and like I said, it lets us be a little bit more observant. But you're absolutely right, and I'm actually proof to your theory here. Nobody taught me how to journal, and I really had it wrong for many, many years. It only became valuable when I realized that I had to go back, give it some time, give it some air, go back and read that, and don't change the story. Just sit back and figure out, what did you learn from the story? And that's when it becomes valuable, at least for me. We all have our own tools. That's a Rob tool.
yeah, that's really cool. I actually never thought about that aspect. I wonder if it would be interesting to journal and then have a schedule like every 3 months, every year, I'll go back and look and
I give it a year, then I double back. Then I go read that year. And that's when it really becomes interesting. It's been so delightful getting to know you and talking to you. And I am just so grateful that you were able to spend some time with us. How do people get a hold of you and join the army, the legion of people that seem to be following you? How do they do that?
Well, you can sign up for my listserv on my website, which is elizavancourt.com with no U in court. People always put a U in it. So, and that's great. I do content there. I don't do anywhere else. I'm actually developing a course right now. So you'll be the first to know and be able to get discounts on the course, which is on public speaking. And then you can follow me on any of the apps. The one caveat I have is that I have a lot of TikTok followers. So if you want to be able to communicate with me on the apps, the best way to do it is through Instagram or LinkedIn or Facebook, but not TikTok. It's hard
Isn't
on
that
TikTok.
interesting? Yeah, you are the anti in many ways. I have a lot of TikTok followers, so don't communicate with me through
Yeah,
TikTok.
definitely comment, but if you think I'm going to get your message, first of all, there are so many filters, and I hate it when people leave me these heartfelt messages and I miss them. So, I'll get them on other apps, but not so much on TikTok. And I think if someone takes the time to really write you something from the heart, you really should take the time to read it.
Well, she's Eliza Van Court. She's a Barrett Kohler author. She doesn't even know this really, but she's got the best publisher in the business. And you are a delight. I'm so grateful. Thank you for coming in and talking to us today.
Thank you for all you're doing for authors. I really think it's amazing and I appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, we'll do it again as well as we can next time, everybody. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and recommend it on iTunes, Outcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information on this show and Rob at jollis.com.